Greetings, everyone. My name is Emily Louie, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I would like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications 5, the fifth and final webinar in our free communications webinar series. We are broadcasting live from our office in downtown Chicago, and we thank you for joining us. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. First off, close any programs other than GoToWebinar that you are running on your computer. We recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move your cell phone away from your computer, and if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to us at Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn one continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. We won't be sharing our slides today, but this webinar is recorded. The follow-up email will also contain a link to the recording. And we do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andy Brommel, Director of Communications Consulting here at Campbell & Company.
Thank you, Emily. Here we are, Fundraising Communications 5. Like boys to men before us, we've come to the end of the road, the fifth and final webinar in our Fundraising Communications series. Thank you so much to everyone who's been with us throughout this series over the last year, and to those of you who are just joining us today, or have maybe been to just a few of these webinars. You don't have to do the whole series to understand what we're talking about. It's all pretty straightforward. So I'm Andy Brommel. I'm Director of Communications Consulting for Campbell & Company, which means I lead the team that does case development and campaign communications work. I happen to be sick today. I woke up yesterday all wrong, which I mention, I guess, not just in the tradition of men being giant babies about being sick, but just in case I need to go on mute and sneeze for like a minute and a half, you'll know what's going on. Anyway, so I'm going to be sharing today some of the insights and approaches that our communications team uses in the projects that we work on every day. And really bringing you some of the actual tools and tricks that we use. So as I mentioned, this is the fifth and final webinar in our communications series. And over the last year, we've been looking at this one major question of how do we tell our story in a fundraising context? And we've looked at that from a number of different angles, defining your case for support, crafting your message, engaging your volunteers with your case, and developing fundraising materials that work for you in a major donor setting. So, and now we're bringing all of that together with today's session, which is a special look focused specifically on campaigns. So why am I telling you about webinars that have already happened in the past? What use is that? These are actually all recorded. So you can, whether you participated in them or not, you can go and check these all out. They're all on the Campbell & Company YouTube channel. And it's a good way to go back and refresh or to catch up on ones that you weren't able to attend. So let's talk about campaigns and the unique case development and fundraising communications challenges and opportunities that arise when you're not doing normal day-to-day fundraising, you're doing a special campaign. So the usual model, the way you often see this depicted is to think about your case as kind of in this architectural sort of metaphor, where your campaign success is supported by these different factors. You may have seen something like this if you've hired a fundraising consultant in like 1995, or more recently. We don't really update our tricks too much. This is good as far as it goes. It conveys something useful. But I've always kind of struggled with this as the way of thinking about campaigns and the role of the case, because it kind of suggests that all these factors are co-equal or sort of doing the same kind of support for your campaign. Like you could just sort of take one of them away and you'd still be fine if you've ever played Jenga. I'd like to suggest a different interpretation. I think the case plays a really unique and critical role in driving fundraising. I think of fundraising as kind of this complicated machine with these different parts. You've got your staffing and systems, you've got your volunteer structure, especially in a campaign, that's really important. You've got, and all that's driving this sort of donor engagement cycle that you're trying to manage. And all of that works together and interacts, but the case is kind of what powers the whole machine. The case is what gives that machine and that whole operation something to work with, something to drive toward. So in other words, let's, enough with the metaphors. No case, no campaign. The case is what makes a campaign a campaign. It's what makes it different than regular fundraising. It's what gives you some spark, some sort of something to go and actually build a campaign around. So let's talk a little bit about, what makes a campaign case different. Because a lot of what I've said so far and a lot of what we cover in some of the other webinars is really true of fundraising in general, whether you're in a campaign or not. But today's session is all about campaigns. So what makes a campaign case different than an annual or kind of a non-campaign case? This is kind of a story of both advantages and challenges. So on the advantage side, developing a strong case in a campaign, what makes that easier than a sort of a non-campaign case? The vision is usually bigger. You're going beyond business as usual to raise money for big ideas with the power to transform your mission. So that's great. It gives you a stronger, like a bigger story to tell. So that's an advantage. Second, campaigns create urgency. There's a sense of urgency, a sort of a once-in-a-generation opportunity. You're trying to create a sense of moment around your campaign. Every campaign kind of has to feel like a moment, a significant moment. So that's an advantage. You've got that sense of everything coming together in a critical moment. And finally, on the advantage side, you're often raising money for compelling projects. Whether that's capital projects, building new buildings, innovative programs that you're launching or taking to larger scale, or making big new investments in your endowment. Campaigns typically have some really cool projects in them, and that menu of projects can be really compelling in its own right. So all of those are, advantages that make it easier to tell a compelling story in a campaign versus just like in your annual day-to-day fundraising. But there are also some challenges. It's not all sunshine and roses. Some ways in which campaigns, I would just say they sort of raise the degree of difficulty for your case development work. The first is that you have to inspire above and beyond giving. Getting people to go beyond what they give you year to year regularly and think about something that they've never thought about before, a gift that's on a much greater scale. That's hard. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Second challenge, you have to, campaigns are typically driven to a significant degree by volunteer leaders, whether that's your board or your development committee or a campaign committee. So you have to get your messaging and your case to a place where volunteers who aren't professional fundraisers can feel totally comfortable delivering your case. That's a challenge. That's a higher standard. And finally, because campaigns have that volunteer structure and because they're significant organizational projects that need buy-in from leadership and your board, you tend to have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and we all know how that can be. So everything that's going through an internal staff review process, then a campaign committee, then maybe it's going to the board. You're trying to take your case for support through that gauntlet of reviewers and opinions and input. It can be hard to get an idea through that gauntlet and have it come out the other side still having integrity, still having focus, still having power. So that's a real challenge. We're going to talk a little bit about how we manage that, but we just want to be, recognize that for everything that campaigns give you the potential to tell a really powerful case and story, they also bring some very real challenges. So another way of looking at this, so we're consultants. One of the main things we do here is campaign planning studies or feasibility studies, taking a campaign case and going out and getting some feedback on it from donors and volunteers to help an organization figure out, can we do this campaign? How should we do this campaign? What should our goal be? How should we frame the case? When we do these kinds of campaign studies, there are some common themes in the more challenging feedback that we get from donors. So the first one, these seem like good projects in this campaign, but what's the larger vision? Second one, okay, this sounds like a good vision. The big lofty idea is really compelling, but I need to see the details. How do I know they're actually going to be able to deliver on this? So these two go together, obviously, like, because these are sort of two sides of the same coin. And what they tell us is that campaigns, in your campaign case, you need to have both the vision level and the sort of project plan, detail, substance level. You have to be strong at both levels, because if you're weak on either one of those, people will raise one or the other of these objections. Third common challenge that we get, what will really be different? This is fine, but I don't get what's going to be different about this. I'm just going to keep giving at my current giving level. This is actually the trickiest part. We're going to talk about this a fair amount in this webinar. And then the fourth, final, our favorite. I didn't read it. We love this. It's always nice after you've put in all the effort to come up with a really good campaign case, put it through that whole process, and then you get this piece of feedback. This is especially fun feedback when the person is like raising questions that are answered in the case, but they just didn't read it. But I mean, you can't blame the audience. Like, you can't. I mean, that's not. You're not going to get anywhere communications-wise blaming your audience. So remember, our audience is, especially in a campaign, high-level people who have a lot of demands on their attention, on their time. If we're trying to reach them and sort of transmit some really compelling ideas and get them to actually engage and grasp onto those, we need to meet them where they are and give them these ideas in a communications format and a messaging approach that they can really engage and absorb easily. That's our job. It's not their job to read our case. It's our job to get them leaning in and wanting to engage. So all of this is to say that a strong case is among the most important priorities in preparing for your campaign. It's some of the most important work that you can do, that you really have to do as you gear up for a campaign. So it's worth making sure that you devote the time, the energy, the resources to this part of campaign planning, because without a case that works, you're going to have trouble getting your campaign off the ground. So let's dig in. The elements of a strong case. So if you've been following any of our previous webinars this year, you'll recognize this. This is a kind of a 6-part structure that we use to look at the different ingredients that essentially any case for support, whether that's non-campaign or not, any case typically has these 6 ingredients in some measure. And so when you're thinking in a campaign context, there are really 3 of these that become more important, or that I think take an extra level of attention. And so this is actually what we're going to focus on today in the rest of this webinar: the impetus, the vision for your campaign, and your campaign plan. In other words, what makes this campaign a moment to do something special? Why is this urgent? What are we going to do that makes a real difference? And what are we going to do that puts your gift to good use? That's what a campaign is all about, and that's what we're going to focus on. So the rest of this webinar is really organized around those 3 pieces. You see them at the bottom of the slide here. So this is not a webinar about how to write a case statement per se. It's a webinar about how to answer the questions that determine whether your case is effective. So let's dig in. The impetus, what gives your campaign that initial spark? We're going to take our inspiration here from Newton and his first law of motion. By the way, can we just take a moment? The hair. Can we just celebrate that for a second? The first law of motion: an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object at motion will stay in motion with the same speed and direction unless a force acts upon it, blah, blah, blah. What this means, people and things are going to keep on doing whatever they've been doing unless and until you hit them with some kind of new force or impetus. So in a fundraising context, think about this. if someone's been giving you X dollars every year for 5 years, what on earth would prompt them to give you 2X, twice as much for the next 5? That's a pretty typical campaign ask. You've got someone who's already a donor, they're giving you $5,000 a year. Nice, that's a nice donor. And you'd like them to consider a $25,000 campaign gift that's payable over 5 years. So just basically doubling what they would give to you. Why would they do that? We're creatures of habit. We do the same thing every morning. I have been eating the same breakfast since like 2003. People don't change their behavior unless there's some really specific intervention. So with a campaign, I just want us all to feel what we're really asking people to do. It's easy to forget that, like, we all got our habits. This is why a campaign needs an impetus to get someone out of their habitual level of giving and give them a reason to think about something different. So this is not super complicated. It's just really important. And in fact, I think you can boil this down. Don't need to overcomplicate it. There are basically 2 ways to approach this. Think about that impetus, that spark, that force to change someone's habitual giving. At the heart of that is basically a feeling. The impetus part of your campaign case is really about choosing what your campaign is going to feel like. And often it really is a decision that you need to make about kind of the emotional tone and voice and tenor of the case. So think about it this way. Is this campaign driven more by threat, challenge, need, or do we feel a sort of almost like a fear or a sense of what would happen if we don't do this? Or is it driven more by opportunity, aspiration, hope, being excited about the positive potential of what we're achieving? Let's look at some examples. Let's say that you are a public radio or public media organization, and you are in a city where one of the main newspapers has shut down. The other one had to cut back. So there's so much less coverage and resources for local and state politics. Some of the most important journalism, the resources for that are getting really thin in your community. And you see people losing trust in journalism and fake news and all that. So that's your broader context. You could frame your campaign in 2 different ways. The impetus for your campaign might be on the threat, challenge, need side, that quality local journalism has never mattered more, but we face the greatest challenges. You could focus on those challenges. On the other hand, maybe if that doesn't feel right, maybe you could focus on the sense of opening, of opportunity. This, the depletion of journalism in your community is an opportunity to step up. So today we have the chance to tell more stories from more voices in more ways and serve our community as never before. You're stepping into that gap. You're filling that vacuum. You're using new storytelling approaches, new digital capabilities. You're building on your success. So a simple choice between different framings. Let's say your campaign is more about taking something that you do and scaling it up. This is pretty universal, common kind of campaign structure. So you could frame that in terms of, we've only scratched the surface. We've got these programs that work, but we've only scratched the surface. The need is so much greater. We have to respond to this challenge, this threat in our community by taking this program that works and taking it and doubling the size of it. Or you could, different tone, opportunity, aspiration, hope. We've proven that our mission works. Now it's time to build on that success and achieve impact at much greater scale. That's exciting. We're building on success. So one final example. This is a framing that we see come up in environmental and conservation missions with some regularity, where there's a sense of working against, the timeline and the looming threats of climate change and irreversible ecological processes. You can focus on, this is our last chance to solve this problem, or this is the best chance we'll ever have to solve this problem. So again, simple, it's more of a nuance, but it changes the feeling. You can see how these choices help set the tone for a campaign. All I want you to do is just recognize that that's a decision, and it's one of the important decisions that you make. So the question, in your campaign is always, which one of these is right for you? Which one fits? Which one fits the moment that you're in? Which one could you imagine your board members and leadership using? Which one, fits the voices of the actual people who will be doing the fundraising? The other question that this suggests is, can you do both? So a lot of times when we present this kind of choice to organizations or to boards, they'll say, well, it's kind of both. So can you do both? Sure. I mean, you can do anything, you can do this any way you want. You can do anything you want. But if you try to do both, you're just recognize that you're kind of upping the degree of difficulty. You're asking your volunteers, your board members to be able to weave together two contrasting themes and then synthesize them, which again, a lot of people can do, but just you're making things a little more complicated. And if you find that you can shape your campaign around a more focused or a singular expression of the impetus, it's probably a little bit easier. In all of this, just remember what we're getting at with this, which is that question that someone is definitely going to ask, which is, so what? What's the urgency? Why is this? Why do we need to do this? Campaigns need to get out of the nice to do territory and into the need to do, must do territory. And so this question of so what is probably the most predictable question that you will face in developing your case. One of your board members is going to ask this. And it's one of those things that can be easy to overlook or to assume that everybody knows. You're just kind of we all know it's there. We think we all know it's there, but we never quite say it as clearly as we need to. That's how you end up, facing this question. So we've just talked about the impetus, that spark, the urgency. Let's talk about the second piece we want to focus on, your campaign vision. And here we're all about answering this question of what will be different. If you had to boil the campaign down to one big idea or one sentence or one simple expression, what is that? So I'll lead by sharing our big idea from a communications standpoint, which is that visionary campaigns inspire visionary giving. That's why this matters. So when we talk about a campaign vision and having your campaign boil down to a simple vision statement, why do we need that? What does it do? Good campaign visions do a lot of really important work for you. They answer that question of what will be different. They give you something that you should be able, or your donors should be able, to picture in your mind. That's a really important test. Can you picture what will be different? Can you see the world that we're creating? So, example, we'll create a community where no child goes hungry at school. There's a whole bunch of plans and programs and details about how we're going to get there. But the picture we want in your head as we talk about this is a community where no child is going hungry at school. A good campaign vision makes that distinction from your annual fund. The vision, it's a big part of what separates or elevates your campaign case from above and beyond your day-to-day fundraising message. So if you're a school, let's say, so your school, independent school, your annual fund message is about investing in everything that makes your school excellent today. That's your annual fund. Everything that people chose when they chose your school, invest in what makes us excellent today. Your campaign might be about either reaching a whole new level of excellence or maybe making sure that you can offer that same standard of excellence for the next generation of students. There's a contrast and difference between what we're doing in our annual fund or just sort of day-to-day fundraising and what this campaign is going to allow us to do on a higher level. Finally, your campaign vision makes projects add up to something greater. It makes your campaign more, this is especially important if you have multiple projects in a campaign. You want them to not just feel like a laundry list. So here's an example from an art school, a college of art and design. And this campaign, it was a whole laundry list of projects. There were dozens and dozens of projects in this campaign. They were mostly endowed funds, endowed scholarships, endowed faculty positions, growing some key programs, et cetera, et cetera. It was I don't think I worked on this campaign. I don't even think I ever really knew what all the projects were in it. But we knew what it was about. The vision was to attract the most creative people in the world to make their careers in our city. That means students, that means faculty, it means staff, it means our alumni, all that they go on to do. It's about building a creative economy, making our city the kind of place that attracts creative talent and draws and keeps people here. So a strong campaign vision makes all that stuff add up to something more. We have, one of our kind of go-to phrases in our communications team when we're working on campaigns, we're trying to get them to this level. We'll describe a campaign as a here's some stuff campaign, because if it feels like, or we feel like we're not there yet, and we've got a lot of good ideas, but the campaign still feels like, hey, here's some stuff. That's the difference we're going for with having a clear vision. So it's important to have this expression of vision, but it's actually really hard to do well. Sorry, isn't that how it always is? The important stuff is hard. Most organizations struggle to articulate the vision in their campaigns. This is often the piece that needs the most work and the most pushing, but there are ways to get there, to create an inspiring vision that's authentic to your organization. Let's talk a little bit more about what those are. So first, it's important to remember, like, the campaign vision can take a lot of different forms. You can use a lot of different kinds of vocabulary. You don't have to do this one specific way. It can be idealistic and lofty. So meaning rooted in an idea, an ideal, of value, something you feel as sort of part of your identity. So here's our example. Supporting the media that fuels democracy. This might be, back to our public media example. That's like an idealistic thing that a person believes. They would affiliate sort of their identity with that expression. So if you're doing that, that can be your campaign vision. It's idealistic, it's lofty. If that's your approach, then you need to balance that out with being really concrete about the impetus, why this is necessary. On the other hand, you don't have to try to be so lofty. A campaign vision can be very concrete and pragmatic. The vision can be, we're going to give 1,000 more residents per year a place to call home. So don't undersell or underestimate the potential of a very concrete kind of campaign vision. That can be absolutely visionary. If your mission is to provide access to home ownership, or to help people get out of homelessness, to do significantly more of that in a measurable way, a specific way, that's really compelling. You don't need to appeal to larger ideals if you've got that really concrete, specific vision. Again, you can picture it in your mind. Third option, you can focus on the sense of transformation. A lot of campaign visions have that transformational feel. So let's say we're going to go from training people to get a job to training them to build a career. So you're showing before and after in a simple, easy, memorable phrase. Or maybe your vision is, the structure is more like leveling up, building on success. So you're still showing a transformation, but it's more about degree, or it's not about changing direction, it's about changing level. So we're going to ensure that our city has a world-class theater for another 100 years. This is an example from a theater that was needed to build a whole new theater facility. They were the only really significant cultural theater organization in their community, and that's really what that campaign was about. There was a building project in it, and people could fall in love with the particulars of the building and the renderings, but what it was really about at the vision level was, if we don't do this, we're not going to have a great theater here. This is what this is really about. So the point is, all these things look and feel different vocabulary, different approaches. You need something that could live in one of these boxes, that could boil down to a sentence, stand on its own, and give someone the most important idea in your campaign in a really simple way that they can understand. So how do you get to that kind of statement? Here are a few guidelines, and I want you to think about, as we go through this, think about saying these things out loud. That's a really good test for campaign vision statements, because this is probably the idea that you most want to make sure works in conversation. You want that vision statement to be able to transmit by word of mouth. Someone to be able to remember it, talk about it, say it to others, So with all of these, remember how important it is to have something that you can say out loud and doesn't just work on paper. So first and foremost, be concise. Here's an example. This campaign is about making our campus reflect and support who we are as a school. This is from a kindergarten through 8th grade school that we worked with a while ago. And a bunch of different capital projects. They were building some stuff and renovating some stuff. And, it was a lot of cool little projects rolled together. But to make it not feel like a laundry list, we needed an idea that was more about who we are. This is bringing our campus in line with who we are and how we teach and how we learn and what we value as a school. So you're taking bricks and mortar stuff and making it about identity and value and who we are. So, and it works because it's concise. Second, it needs to be memorable, sticky even. Example here, we're going to go from addressing homelessness to preventing it. So that's easy to remember. It's just a little, there's the structure of the sentence kind of makes it easy to pinpoint the turn or the transformation. And think about how important it is that this is memorable. You're going to go have your cultivation conversation with someone. You're going to go through the case in depth and detail. And then afterward, they're going to be left with whatever they remember, whatever kind of lives in their mind from that conversation. And that's what they're going to use to talk to themselves about the campaign. Oh, should I, how seriously am I considering investing in this? That's what they're going to use if they're talking to their spouse the next day and saying, I think we really ought to think about doing something significant for this campaign. They might remember or repeat a few key ideas, so you want your vision to be one of those. And just in most campaigns, there's a huge social word of mouth community dynamic to giving, and it's about ideas kind of propagating throughout your community, especially places like schools where there really is a sense of community. So being memorable is basically your way of having some level of influence on the whole word of mouth side of campaigns. Charismatic, what do we mean by that? Meaning it's something people want to get behind. It's not something that you want, it's something that a person would see and say, oh, I want to be a part of that. That makes me feel like I'm part of something big. That speaks to a sense of inspiration or emotion or imagination. When you hear it, you want it. So the classic example here is to put a man on the moon. This is not a nonprofit example. As far as I am aware, please let me know if there is a nonprofit that is currently working on this. But it's the perfect example of just a charismatic idea. You picture it, you want to be part of it, you want to get behind it. Finally, credible. So there's a risk when you're trying to be visionary. There's a risk of going too far, of going for the loftiest rhetoric in a way that kind of takes your feet off the ground. So the guidance we give our clients and the line we're always looking for in our work is, what's the most ambitious thing we can say that's still credible? What's the ambitious edge of what is credible? What's the biggest thing we can say about this campaign and deliver on and defend? So, good example, we're going to double the number of children we serve in 5 years. If we've got a plan to back that up, if we can defend that, we can make that credible, it's tremendously exciting. But when you start putting ideas like that out there, know that some of your donors are going to say, wait, can you really do that? So that's, that finding that edge, ambitious but credible. And think again with all of these, what does it sound like to say them out loud? There's a lot of kinds of language that and I'm a writer by background. I love writing. I love what you can do with language on paper, but there's such a smaller and a different domain of language and ideas and messages that work out loud and in conversation. And that's where you want to be focusing. So take the time to get this vision statement right. Make that one of your early priorities. And it can feel weird to set yourself up in this case development process and spend an inordinate amount of time, it can feel like, on just this one little sentence. I promise you the time is worth it, because once you've got that one sentence vision or that really simple version, expanding outward from it is easy. It's like running downhill. Once you've got the vision, it's easier to build out the case. It's easier to develop your collateral. Whereas if you start with a long version and you try to keep cutting it down and like distilling and wait, what's the key idea in there? It's just so much harder. Every step of that is difficult. So I don't know that it's possible really to spend too much time trying to get that core vision statement right. So how do you get those ideas flowing? Here, I'll show you a few of the things that we use all the time. These are just standard exercises that we do with boards of directors, with campaign committees, with organizational leaders. We use these little sentence starters. Summarize the campaign. This campaign is all about blank. We ask them to, or to frame it as a challenge. We must X, Y, Z. What do we need to do? Moment. It's time for us to what? And we just say, all we're asking you to do is complete the sentence. Don't write a paragraph. Don't write a page. Give us, what is that one sentence? Now, this is a really good exercise to do with your board or your campaign committee or your staff or whoever, whatever you can do this at different levels. You're not going to get a perfect version out of those exercises. Part of what you're going to get is everyone in that decision-making process gaining an appreciation for how hard this is, so then they'll be nicer when you bring them drafts. But it's a really good way to try to embrace the exercise of a campaign vision statement. Just put these on the screen, give people 5 minutes with heads down, and then go around the room and see what people come up with. It's funny how in a campaign that might seem really straightforward, we're building a building, that's all it's about. You can get wildly different interpretations and versions, and it highlights how important that decision is, even when the campaign seems really simple. The other one we like to do all the time, we call these eye exam questions because it's like when you go to the eye doctor and they put the weird torture device on your face and they say, which is better, A or B? B or C, C or D. Just presenting people with these simple little dichotomies and asking them which one feels more right. So we'll do these. We have a million variations on this, but should our campaign vision, our campaign overall feel more emotional or rational? Should it feel more focused on big picture, lofty ideas, or should it be more focused on really specific, grounded, concrete kinds of ideas? Should it be more energetic and, or weighty? Are we going for energy or gravitas? Should we, back to the original question in the impetus section, threat or aspiration? You can do these a lot of different ways, but these are very clarifying questions that try to get to the heart of, what feels like the core, the distilled essence or the vision in this campaign. So that's how we approach clarifying a campaign vision. And I mentioned earlier when we were looking at that campaign study feedback, where people will say, okay, the vision is great, but the projects, where's the detail? Or they'll say, the projects are great, but where's the vision? You need to be strong at both levels, both the vision and the plan. Now let's talk a little bit about the plan. Because even if you have the most compelling vision and big picture idea in the world, you've got to be able to back it up with some substance and make the campaign feel credible. So the wisdom of cliches here. A goal without a plan is just a wish. Maybe somebody, some football coach, told you this sometime trying to be inspirational. It's true of campaigns as well. If all you've got is your vision, you're not really there yet. So how do vision and plan work together? If your vision is to expand our capacity to serve 500 more students, and we're going to do it by the year 2020. That's your vision. It's clear, concrete. You picture it. It's one of those more pragmatic kinds of visionary statements. You picture it. You want it. It's charismatic. It's memorable. Easy. The plan that supports that is, okay, we need a new middle school wing. We need to endow more faculty positions. We need to endow more scholarships. So that's the stuff. If you just had the stuff on the plan level, this is where your campaign has that sense of here's some stuff. You need that vision to bring it all together. You need to be strong at both levels. Another example here. This is from a voluntary health association that's working to eradicate a disease. So the vision is very clear, very simple. It's a world without that disease. But the plan that backs that up is there's a research side of it, there's care and support for families, there's advocacy for public funding around the research, there's awareness building to raise the public awareness and concern about this condition. There's all that stuff going on at the plan level that makes that vision is super lofty. That vision is super, that's the dream. And when you're reaching that high with lofty aspirational rhetoric, you need a really solid plan to balance it out. So the way you approach this, in most campaigns, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 or sometimes 5 or 10 or dozens of projects. The big university campaign, endless projects. For most campaigns, you want to think about, for every major project, could you build out a project case? And everything that kind of applies to the campaign as a whole, you recreate in miniature for the project case. So, a few points about project cases. First of all, these are important because they are, as we've been saying, this is kind of what makes the campaign real. If your vision is a world without this disease, the project substance is what is going to make that feel at all real and give people the ability to picture how you get there. This is typically where donors will ask the most challenging questions. If they're bought in on your vision, they want to kick the tires and push and probe on the substance or the project level to ask about, okay, well, why does this building cost so much? Wait, how are we going to manage the construction process? Do we actually have the capacity? If we build this program to this level through this campaign, will we be able to sustain it afterward? How do we make sure that we're not building a building that's going to cost too much to operate and put the organization at risk? This is where some of those detail-oriented, challenging questions come in. So a lot of developing a project case is about anticipating what those are going to be and making sure that you've given some thought to them. You can launch your campaign while the projects are still coming into focus within reason. You have to be able to show your donors generally where you're going, generally what the projects are going to be about. Especially if you're at the beginning of the campaign, you can say, we're still in the architectural planning process to nail down the exact details of this. We're still building the programmatic plans. It's okay you don't have to have everything defined when you go out the door, but especially when you're talking to board members and the early donors and volunteers who are much closer to your organization. So I don't want this to be, an impediment to starting the conversations you need to start. But you do need to be able to say in general what those projects are going to seek to accomplish. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, think about how each project ties to the larger vision. You want, it's like your project cases need to be able to somewhat stand on their own and be compelling on their own, but they also need to tie back to that larger vision. And finally, just remember that your volunteers, a lot of their anxiety about fundraising and doing their fundraising work in a campaign is going to have to do with whether they feel comfortable answering questions and knowing the details about the projects that you're doing. They don't necessarily need to memorize all those details, but they just need to know that they're there, so that if they go out and get an appointment with one of their friends to talk about a campaign, someone they trust, someone they care about, and they want to know that that person's not going to ask them some easy sort of softball, some very reasonable question and catch them totally flat-footed with, not knowing important information about a project. So a way to approach this, keeping all that in mind, I like to try to think about project cases in terms of just a few key ideas, top 5 benefits or features. Make it easy to remember, give your volunteers the confidence that they've got some simple, selling points to go sell with these projects. And this is a way to manage your project cases when the details are still evolving. So let's say you're building a new theater. This is, excuse me, back to that example of the theater that needs to build a whole new theater. So they didn't have the complete, detailed, exhaustive plans yet, but they knew So we couldn't say, here's all the square footage, here's all the specific blueprints or whatever. But we knew generally what this theater was going to be about. We were able to say, this new theater is going to ensure that our community has great theater for decades. It's going to enable us to double the scope of our educational programs. It's going to take our stagecraft, what we can do on the production side and the production technologies, all that's going to a whole new level. It's going to give our audiences a much more comfortable experience from the seating, the lobby, the amenities, the bathrooms, all that stuff that audiences care about. And 5, it's going to offer a better working environment for our artists, which also is going to mean we're going to be able to attract, bring in fantastic actors and directors from other cities to come do their work in our city. So you don't need to know the exact square footage to be able to give a reasonably substantive, vision about this project. So I like this approach. It's easy, it's simple, and it manages that. It gives you a way to approach it when you're still figuring out all the details. Okay, so that's what we're talking about at the sort of the plan section of your case, making sure your campaign is substantive. So up until now, I've really just been talking about the substance of your case. What is the substance of what you're expressing in terms of the impetus, the vision, and the plan? The other piece of the puzzle is the process. How do you get there? Because, like anything, especially when we have all these committees and board involvement and staff involvement, how you manage the process is just as important as the product, and it's really, really critical. Like the decisions you make about the process pretty much determine where you're going to land in terms of product. So I'll give you some hard-earned wisdom on these processes from having gone through many, many, many of them and heard a lot of feedback along the way. I always tell our clients it's very difficult to hurt our feelings, through the feedback and revision process. But I assure you, we've seen everything, we've heard everything. And how do you manage that process? First of all, make this one of the major early priorities of your campaign planning work. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Don't if you're focusing on your list of prospects, but you still don't have a case, you're kind of, you need something to approach those prospects with. Second point, have one author and a defined circle of reviewers. Be intentional about who is writing this document, whatever format it takes. It's best for that to be one person versus everybody kicking it around. Even if that person is obviously taking input from a number of reviewers, it's good to have one person who owns it and who is writing and making the edits. You want to have a defined circle of reviewers. Typically, that's your chief executive, chief fundraising person, possibly some key programmatic staff who, if the campaign is going to affect specific programmatic areas, the key people around those areas should review that. Although be careful, because when you involve program staff, you tend to get a million edits that clarify the case to death. So you want to take their input, but you're not typically giving them sort of final edit or final veto power. We need to reserve our right to express things in a way that works for donors, even if it means leaving out some key details or some finer points that your program staff may be really fixated on. But you want them on your side. You need their input. And then on the volunteer side, this is typically reviewed by a campaign committee. If you don't have one of those, it might be your development committee, or you might want to just keep it to your campaign co-chairs or a smaller circle of reviewers on the volunteer side. But really try to be careful, because every time you send this or forward it, you're asking for input. You're creating an obligation to do something with that input. And you're creating some potential for your document to get pulled in a million directions and diluted. Third point, choose the format for your case that works for you, and consider presentation formats instead of narrative case statements. We talk about this a lot in some of the other webinars. If you're doing a long narrative case statement, a Word document that's like 12 or 15 pages long, you're inviting a very particular kind of editing. You're inviting wordsmithing, track changes, word choices, people obsessing over. That is the most exhaustive and exhausting way to take a document through a review process is to go through, use a Word document. When you use a presentation format, PowerPoint, a deck, a set of talking points, you keep people focused on the ideas, and you keep them focused on what works in conversation versus trying to engineer language on a page in a written format. So we try to take a PowerPoint or a presentation version, use that as the vehicle for all the early case work and defining the case, and then once we've got that approved, then we'll produce a written document, a brochure, a narrative case statement. So do yourself a favor. Fourth, when you're choosing a campaign name and identity, I haven't talked about that really here. It's a whole domain unto itself. This is probably the trickiest part of decision in most campaign creative processes, because trying to get a whole committee of people to agree on a campaign name is, think about how hard it would be to get them to agree on ordering a single pizza and then make it 10 times more important than that. It's really tricky. So you want to be very careful about how you manage that process. Do not go to those groups and say, okay, we need a campaign name, so let's all get in a room and brainstorm it. What you want to do is keep control of that process, have one author, and bring them a structured choice with a few concepts, which I misspelled. Hey, what's up? You want to say, okay, here's option 1, option 2, option 3. Here are the pros and cons of option 1, option 2, and option 3. Have them be different than from each other in some really distinct and useful ways. Have one of them be more lofty, have one of them be more concrete, have one of them be, really simple, have one of them be a little more expressive or out there. Simple choices that occupy different categories, and then show them a little preview of what the language would look like. If we go with option 1, here's what the campaign sounds like. If we go in option 3, the language is more like this. And then you're going to get, the feedback of, oh, we like this from this one and this from that one. Can we weave them together? Sometimes you can, but be careful that with a campaign name, don't create I call it like a futon, something that is terrible at 2 things instead of being good at 1 thing. Don't let your campaign name get pulled in 2 directions. And the best way to manage that risk is to present a structured choice. And finally, train and coach your volunteer leaders to deliver your case effectively in their own words. And for this, I would just say, go see Fundraising Communications 3. That webinar is all about this. But your work is not done when you put the final, save the final version of the case. What you want to do is then take 1 or 2 of your steering committee meetings, put that document in their hands, and go through specific exercises and practices for them to get comfortable using it, because that's when they'll start to actually feel some ownership. Okay, so a few quick points about process. We've got 7 or 8 minutes left, so let's look at some questions, and let me see if we have received any. All right, so either one of 2 things has happened. Either I'm not using the chat and questions box correctly, which is a very real possibility, or we haven't received any questions.
Andy, I'm actually
was that Emily?
seeing a few. Yep, this is me. I'm seeing a few.
All right.
First is from another Andy. Would you suggest including photographs as part of the presentation format?
Oh, that's a good question. So if you're doing your case, taking your case through the case development process and you're using a presentation format, do you use photographs, visuals in that? I'll actually tell you, the way our team does this is pretty strict and pretty disciplined. We don't show any visuals until we've got total buy-in on the messaging and the language. So when we're doing a campaign case, the version that we will show staff and leadership and even campaign steering committees is plain white text on a black screen. We try to do the simplest, barest approach so that no one's getting distracted by visuals. No one's getting, fixating. Because anytime you show photos, then you're in a whole separate conversation about photo selection, and there goes the rest of your meeting. So when we're trying to show people, here are the key messages, we will use it's a black and white, as simple format as we possibly can, and where the format is sort of telling people, hey, this is intentionally not visual, so don't even ask about, oh, this is great, but we need some photos. Yes, of course we need photos. We're presenting it in such a simple format that that's like, we're not even talking about that yet. Yeah, I think that's really important. Now, when you are presenting campaign name options, you may want to consider showing the name with some logo variations for each of the names, and there you might show, a sample of what the visual direction might look like. You might say, okay, so this is the name, here are 3 logo options, here's what the visual style might look like, here's what kinds of photography we might use to help them understand that choice. But honestly, even there, we often will choose the name based on words alone and then go into a logo and visual direction decision process.
Thanks, Andy. We have a question from Betsy. How long is the campaign name? Is it more important than the campaign vision statement?
Okay, so a couple more thoughts on campaign names, especially given how tricky those are. First of all, when you try to create one, you're going to find yourself coming up with like a list of 7 or 8 things that you feel like it needs to do. Like, it needs to capture this idea and that idea. It needs to feel like this. It needs to reflect this aspect of our branding. It needs to be short. You're going to come up with like 7 or 8 boxes you're trying to check, and you will never, ever, ever check all those boxes with, like, there is no perfect campaign name, and every campaign name, including really great ones, has at least one fatal flaw that some board member in a review process can like just poke their finger into and point out. So you have to know going into it that is just built into it. It's not about finding the perfect campaign name. It's about finding the best one and the one that does the most for you. In terms of length, I mean, definitely you want something that's short and memorable. 2 or 3 words, maybe a very short phrase. If you find that that's not working for you, you can try doing more of a tagline. So you might say, whatever, like make the name itself just a really simple something using your organizational name. Like, okay, so Harvard had the Harvard campaign. I like to point that out from time to time just because, I mean, if it's good enough for them, right? Like, we could probably just use that same trick. So you can do like the Harvard campaign or the Campbell campaign, and then have a tagline that's more of a phrase. Building the next excellence forever, whatever tagline you come up with. So that's another way you can go, is really just a simple, almost like an index type of campaign name, and then using more of a tagline. But yeah, really short and simple. It's got to be memorable. If people don't, and it has to work in a sentence. Like, imagine yourself writing a letter. Hey, we're writing to, talk to you about the such and such campaign. If it doesn't work in that sentence, or if you couldn't say, hey, I'm hoping you'll take a meeting with the fundraisers from the organization because we really want to talk to you about the such and such campaign. If it doesn't work in that sentence, then no one's going to use it. And it'll just be like this campaign name that is approved and is the official name, but no one uses. So, yeah, think about being concise and memorable and just something that works in a sentence.
Great. And then one last question. What are potential pitfalls organizations should be aware of going into the case statement process?
I'm sorry, was it potential pitfalls?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, so many, and we know them all intimately. We live in them. Okay, a few key ones to keep track of. Honestly, I think the biggest pitfall is setting up your process and your review structure in a way that that sort of spirals out of control. So being really intentional about who you send a draft to, what input you ask for from them, and what expectation you create in them of how of how much of their input you will feel sort of obligated to accept. So when we present a draft to a steering committee meeting, where you're saying, here's our case, here's where we have it, we don't present it and then say, does this work? Is this good? We don't ask for evaluative feedback. We say, this is your case. You are going to carry this and deliver this. How can, please help us make sure that this works for you. Please help us make this as strong as it can be. Please let us know if there are particular messages that work particularly well for you that we should emphasize. Please let us know if there are messages that you think we need to emphasize more so that you can deliver this case in your role as a fundraising volunteer. So how you frame those discussions, because you get a bunch of smart people in a room, which is what any of these nonprofit committees are. Like, we're all smart enough to just take something apart. We all have the critical thinking skills to just destroy a document and make ourselves feel really good and smart in the process. So it's like, how do you set up the process so that we don't do that? We actually try to make it stronger. How you frame those discussions is really important, or potential pitfall. All right, well, we're at our time. Those are great questions. Thank you, everyone, so much for logging on, for tuning in, and for joining our series of webinars over the last year. Again, they're all on our YouTube channel. Go check them out. Lots of different stuff reflecting the stuff that we've learned through the work of our communications team. So thank you all so much. Have a great day, and see you next year.